Welcome back to the New Conservative Radio Show. I'm your host, Ninj, and what a State of the Union address that was. Trump killed that. He set the bar way higher. He set a new tone for the State of the Union. And the Democrats' response with Abigail Spanberger, that was the same old fear-mongering and, Trump derangement wrapped up in a nice speech with the liberal media right after as to get the last word in, Did anybody else get that feeling as they were trying to get the last word in? America heard two completely different futures last night. Two worldviews, two governing philosophies, two definitions of power, two definitions of responsibility, and two definitions of what this country even is. What America is. If you watch closely, you didn't just see applause lines and rebuttals. You saw a line in the sand. On one side, you see strength, enforcement, economic nationalism, executive authority. And on the other side, you see caution and restraint, institutional anxiety, and what can only be described as moral framing over mechanical results. And, it wasn't subtle. President Trump walked into the chamber projecting one word, and that was control. Control of the border, control of inflation, control of foreign adversaries, control of the federal agencies, and control of the narrative. And whether you love him or you hate him, the through line was unmistakable. He framed America as a country that had drifted, and now it's being pulled back into order. On immigration, there was no soft language, no ambiguity. He framed the border as a security failure that required enforcement, not negotiation. He spoke in terms of numbers, removals, operational control, restoring authority. He presented this federal government not as a referee, but as the enforcer. And he blamed it on Democrats directly, the open border policies under Joe Biden, and rightfully so. That's a key distinction. We want to love immigration, but it must be through legal immigration, through that leads to naturalization, naturalization citizenship. On the economy, the tone was similar. He didn't speak about some abstract, macroeconomy theory. He spoke on production terms, factories, energy, manufacturing, trade leverage, domestic output, tax relief, His framing was simple. America builds again. America drills again. America will produce again. It's not redistribution of wealth or just wealth building. It's straight production. On foreign policy, he leaned heavily into deterrence language. Strength prevents war. Weakness invites it. Military posture equals stability. Respect equals security, and that's peace through strength. It was not, some diplomatic poetry. It was forced and it was calculus. It's all planned. And, culturally, he doubled down. Law enforcement support, patriotism, American symbolism, reform of the federal bureaucracy. It was a restoration message. You could feel the structure of the speech. America was out of alignment, and now it's being recalibrated. Whether you agree or you disagree, it was intentional and it was consistent. The strong executive, strong borders, strong economy, strong military. It's a strong identity. Strength was the organizing principle because America is strong and Americans are that strength. Each of us together create this land of opportunity, not the land of social equality. These are very different places, and I choose what the founders had in mind, the land of opportunity. That's where we want to be. We want to be somewhere where capitalism is king. We don't want socialism to take over. And the founders didn't have that in mind either. Now contrast that with Abigail Spanberger and her Democrat response. The tone shift was immediate. Where Trump projected control, the response projected caution. Be scared. Trump projected decisiveness. The response projected guardrails. The Democrat response was less about outcomes and more about consequences. Healthcare projections of the failed Obamacare that they, put together. Social program defense because they always want to be able to take care of the illegal aliens, right? Their warnings about overreach because, oh my goodness, ICE has too much power that they gave them. Weird. The usual threat, of Democracy. Oh, our democracy is at threat because Trump is in power? It has nothing to do with anything else, right? Everything that Trump does is everything that they're protesting all the time. It's institutional preservation. That's what the Democrats push for. They want big government, and they want the government in everyone's lives. The emphasis wasn't on American power, it was on American restraint. They framed the executive authority as not a restoration, but as a risk. Like Trump is overstepping his executive powers somehow. Like he's always overstepping somehow in their eyes. They framed enforcement not as some kind of security for us, but as a potential injustice because supporting ICE would be to betray the illegal immigrant bloc of their voters, and they don't want to do that. They got to get in power somehow, so they got to pander to these people. Abigail framed economic nationalism not as, protection, but as a potential cost increase and inequity. Tariffs have already produced massive income for Americans and have given us just one more lever of power over the world to access our massive consumer market. If they want to make money here, they got to pay us money. And that's the way that we were doing in their markets, in their tiny little markets. It makes no sense, but Trump got that all straightened out. And if you look back in the 80s, he talked about this on Oprah's show. But anyways, Abigail's speech, it leaned heavily into vulnerability language, right? The language of the left. Families struggling, communities are anxious, your rights are at risk, and of course, democracy's in danger again. Now, the contrast between that and Trump's speech, where he says the country is regaining control, the Democrats' response, where she said the country may be losing balance. That's not just rhetoric, that's two entirely different emotional appeals. One says we're stabilizing, and the other says we're destabilizing. You be the judge. And you already have, and that's why you're just, that's one more reason why you're not a liberal. You don't have the brain rot. You're not brain dead. Like Jesse Peterson says, it's amazing. The border issue reveals perhaps the sharpest divide. Trump frames immigration as a crisis in sovereignty, and the Democrats' response frames it as a matter of humanity and due process, okay? Republicans speak about law, while the Democrats speak about people. No matter their background or legal status, liberals believe that there should be no borders, which is some kind of utopian bullshit. If you don't have borders, you can't have a country. If you don't have countries, you don't have laws. The thing is that Americans do want both. They care about both things. They want secure borders and they don't want any cruelty, but the speeches emphasize opposite poles. Trump emphasizes enforcement metrics and ending the loopholes, and Democrats' response emphasize compassion and fairness only, which, yeah, we can all get down with that, but there are laws, and security versus empathy, right? But empathy needs to be pushed aside to enforce the laws. Sometimes the situation is sad, but the law needs to be enforced. And the electorate is being asked to choose which risk they fear more, weak enforcement or what Democrats are framing as excessive enforcement. That's the strategic battlefield heading into midterms. And it is really going to matter who frames this better to the moderate American or to the independent. Like I said, in the past, they are the ones who decide elections for the most part. Unless we continue the too big to rig and drag every Republican to the box every election, which we should try to do, Democrats have a real shot at winning every single election. And we don't want to lose. Historically, if the president wins, they usually lose seats in the midterm. And we don't want that to happen. We need to keep pushing Trump's agenda. So on the economy, the divide was philosophical. Trump's framing was production driven. It was about more making. So make more, build more, extract more, manufacture more. He emphasized domestic output as the engine of prosperity, and the Democratic response focused more on the same old political talking points. Cost of living, like Trump had anything to do with it, it was handed over to him. The healthcare access issue, which is another Democrat-born issue from Obamacare. They did protecting the benefits of people, which is basically protecting the benefits of illegal immigrants, because if you qualify illegal benefits, or illegal immigrants for benefits, then you're creating a whole voter base, and they don't want to lose that voter base. Again, it's not that either side ignores the other side's issues entirely, but the emphasis tells you everything that you need to know. The right believes growing solves problems, and the left believes that guardrails prevent harm and proceed to guardrail entire industries and cause massive economic harm to those industries. It's crazy. Growth versus protection, right? So expansion versus regulation. It's risk versus mitigation. That's not just policy, that's worldview inside of America. And the elected politicians that are put in office to represent us as a whole. With foreign policy, the difference is equally as clear. Um, Trump framed global stability as a function of strength, military readiness, economic leverage, strategic positioning. But the Democratic response leaned toward institutional alliances and diplomatic, diplomacy as a stabilizer. They were afraid to use the power of the military, right? We're the most powerful military in the world, and swooping up enemy leaders while they sleep is fine with me. Strength deters. Diplomacy prevents. Both philosophies have historical evidence that work. Both have failures, that don't work. But the State of the Union address, the contrast was clean. The power projection was clear. It's power projection versus consensus building, right? The voters who prioritize security, they tend to lean one way, which is for the military. We pay for it, why not use it? Voters who prioritize stability through cooperation lean the other way. Not all of our enemies are going to cooperate, and they need to be reminded what we are and that we are allowing them to exist in their current state. They're better off being our friends because we have the ability to wipe them off the face of the freaking planet. For real. The rhetorical styles themselves told the story. Trump's speech was declarative. It was short sentences, clear enemies, defined problems, direct blame. It was applause, line driven. Strong verbs, clear subjects, no hedging. The Democrat response was narrative driven. It was human faces creating a sense of urgency through fear. Cautionary framing. It's conditional language. Trump said what it is, and Abigail Spanberger's Democrat response said what it could be. Trump leaned on certainty, and the Democrats lean on warning and fear mongering. That matters psychologically. Certainty energizes. Trump's base, we know this is what's happening. We're ready to go. The Democrats, they're warning of hypotheticals and possibilities. Those are the things that are mobilizing their base. Which mood the country prefers will determine political momentum in the midterms for sure. And one of the most important undercurrents was the role of the executive power. Trump framed the executive authority as necessary to restore order. The Democrats' response framed concentrated authority as danger to democracy and never have before when, Obama was deporting many more people than Trump. Democrats say it's just how it's being done, right? So they don't agree with how Trump is going about it. But if there wasn't sanctuary cities, it wouldn't be done this way. And when the cities begin to cooperate, ICE isn't doing it that way. So it's a problem that they're creating, and then they're raising the flag that they created an issue. I say, get them out of here by any means necessary. If you interfere with ICE, then you should go to jail with the criminals. No more playing with these mentally ill, interference tickets. Americans like decisive leadership in times of instability, but they also fear unchecked power. And that is what Democrats are taking advantage of. And framing the Trump administration as overreaching the executive powers, which is false. But liberals eat it up for whatever reason. They don't do their own research or whatever. The difference between decisive and dangerous often depends on whether you trust the person holding the authority, and Democrats have consistently sold the narrative that Trump is super dangerous to this country. That's the core psychological divide. This isn't just policy disagreement. It's trust versus fear, and Democrats live on fear. Without fear, Democrats have no base. Without the what ifs and the maybe thises, or the hypotheticals altogether. Both speeches were speaking directly to the emotions of their base. Trump was speaking to the emotion of the normal, stable American with a good brain, that functions well and the ability to decipher political and national information on their own. And Abigail was talking to the emotionally unstable people who need reassurance daily that life is going to be okay. But, the real question in this whole in the State of the Union and the response and these speeches and what's going to happen here in the midterms, the real question is who moves the independents. Independents care about the cost of living, safety, stability, normalcy. If they feel more secure after Trump's speech, he gains ground, right? Which was a home run, if you ask me. That State of the Union was a home run out of the park. If you feel more concerned about overreach after the fear-mongering response, then the Democrats gain ground. And that's the battlefield. The battlefield is kitchen tables and, gas prices, school safety, mortgage rates, community stability. Those are the real applause lines that people are paying attention to. But there was also something else, another moment last night that it can't be overlooked. Trump did something that modern presidents rarely do in that chamber, and he directly assigned blame. He didn't speak in a vague bipartisan language. He didn't diffuse responsibility across all of Washington. He pointed at policies. He pointed out at the outcomes, and he pointed at the party that caused them, the Democrats. And he said, "You are the cause of these problems." He said on inflation, he tied it to many terrible spending decisions. And on the border enforcement, he tied it to prior reversals and loopholes used to usher in illegals by the tens of thousands under the Joe Biden's administration. And then on crime in liberal jurisdictions, he talked about, it's their fault with these liberal judges. Energy. He tied it to the regulations and the constraints that halted many projects like the pipelines. Now, whether you agree with the causation or not, the political impact is clear. He framed the past not as misfortune, but as mismanagement. And he didn't soften it. He essentially told the chamber these conditions didn't appear out of thin air. They were the result of choices. The choices, in many instances, the Democrats and the policies that they put forward in the chambers of Congress that they were elected to caused. That is a powerful and hilarious strategy. If you ask me, I was laughing the entire time because once you define a problem as a result of a choice, you imply accountability, right? And once you apply accountability, you create contrast between architects and reformers. The reaction inside the chamber mattered so much when they were showing the Democrats' faces. You could see the divide in body language, applause from the Republicans, and stone faces on the Democrats. Trump leaned into the tension. He didn't try to smooth it over. He just amplified it. And this is why so many people love Trump. He doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable. He framed himself not as the caretaker continuing government, but as a corrective force undoing damage created by government itself. That's a fundamentally different posture than reconciliation politics. It's adversarial governance, and I love it. And many Americans love it as well, and it's what is needed. If you look back at the history of the chambers, there was fistfights in those chambers, many of fistfights. That never happens anymore because we've dumbed down our beliefs and we all try to come together into this false utopia that doesn't exist. We all need to stand up for our beliefs and then come to a common ground, and that's what America is about. It's not one side winning over the other side. Um, the adversarial governance that he brings, it energizes a base that believes in institutions have avoided responsibility for years. Meanwhile, the Democrat response, of course, didn't accept that framing. They didn't concede causation. Instead, they reframed the challenges as complex, global, systematic, and nonpartisan problems. Trump's message was specific policies created specific problems. The response from the left was that, problems are broader than party blame, pushing it away to somewhere else, typical scumbag shit. Direct accountability versus shared complexity, as Democrats would have you believe, clear lines versus diffuse responsibility, right? Diffuse and just push it off and shirk it to everybody else so that there's as little responsibility on them as possible. That part alone may have been one of the most politically consequential moments of the night, because voters who feel frustrated, as the Republican voters, we often want to hear someone say, this happened because of decisions, and I will reverse them. And Trump did just that and is continuing to implement his agenda, which is going to have great benefits for the American people by the end of his term for sure. The State of the Union wasn't just about, this year. It was about the direction of American governance. Do voters want assertive federal authority, enforcing order? Do they see the greater threat as chaos? There was 2 speeches, 2 fears, 2 promises, and Trump says he will fix it through strength. The Democrats say they will protect you from overreach. When I'm not feeling like the tariffs or deportations are going bad, or they're overreaching, so I feel like that's all just imaginary. And the electorate, they're going to decide this year. So politics is rarely about perfection. It's about priority. But make no mistake, these are not minor differences. This is a fundamental argument about the nature of American power. And that argument is only going to intensify as we move more closer towards the midterms, because the State of the Union address and the rebuttal, it was both parties making their case. And now the country needs to make its choice. So we'll see what happens. This is the New Conservative Radio Show, and the contrast has never been clearer. 2 visions, 1 country. We'll see which one America chooses this fall. Stay sharp and stay informed, and stop by 4547blog.com and get some conservative apparel. Read the free blog, and leave, like, comment, and follow. We'll see you next time.